Okay, and we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. It's been a pleasure having you here. We've had like series of other topics, and now we are about to discuss open source. I mean, everybody likes open source. Everybody's talking about open source, but are you sure you're doing it well, or do you want to know how to do it well? So that's why we have Ace I'm going to call him Ace
It's
It's
all
really
right.
easy to call him Ace. So we have Ace here. He's a staff developer advocate at TBD, and he's the creator of this very big open source project made in Nigeria there. And he'll be here to answer all our questions on open source. So if you're here with us, you can kindly drop your questions and then he'll answer them. So but for now,
Try my best.
thank you for joining us, Eskid.
Thank you for having me, Damilola. Can I call you Dami or Damilola? I mean, whichever one works, I guess.
Damn you shorter. Just damn
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Dev. Welcome for also having me. Always a pleasure to share my experience.
Yeah, okay. So before we start, I would like to. I mean, I've read your bio, read your profile, read everything I need to know about you. But I know that
Yeah.
like a couple of people that want to know, oh, how did 8 start? How where did you start from? Did you start as a developer or So can you just give us a little bit of intro into your career? Like, how did you come into developer relations and then open source? When did the
Right.
intersection happen between both? Yeah.
Right. How do I start? Yeah, I mean, I started learning how to code in 2012. That was like the second semester of my first year in university. I had like interest in computers like just a few years prior, but not exactly software development. So that was the first time I was trying to learn how to write Java or C Sharp or Visual Basic, like just picking stuff up. But then the day I wrote like HTML, CSS, like background color to red, and the whole page just changed. I knew okay, I was probably just gonna probably just gonna stick to writing web development stuff. Um, I got my internship at hotels.ng. I think that was like one of my first forays into like actual tech as a career. Even
Mm-hmm.
though I was studying computer science in school, but that was like the practical kind of angle to it. So I got my internship at hotels.ng in 2013, I believe, and it was the first time I had to like get involved with Git. And with open source, with all these other things, it's built on like version control. And one popular, most widely used version control tool today is Git. So having to work out Hotels NG was where I had to like learn Git to be able to participate, collaborate as part of the team, and then make changes, get updated. Like it was just like a whole system on its own. But after that, I just styling. I was very interested in building stuff on my own. But for the developer advocacy transition itself, it was just a natural transition for me because growing up then I didn't know what I wasn't even sure about the paths I could take as a tech career person. I just knew I'll be a software engineer and that was it, to be honest, for the most part. But I was very interested in participating in community stuff, showing some of my colleagues at the time that also wanted to learn how to code, like hosting classes or talks, as the case may be. We didn't call it talks then. It was like, well, let's just gather and do stuff like that. We're just giving sessions. I think that was that's probably the word we used. And leaving school and getting involved in the developer community in Lagos was an amazing community there, very supportive. I started doing community stuff, building projects that were community themed, speaking at events, and just doing all of these things that kind of fall into developer relations at the end of it. But my journey into open source specifically was very interesting. I was building some projects, but I felt very stalled, like I was doing the same kind of projects over and over again. So I reached out to Unicode developer. I'm sure everyone knows him.
Yeah.
Prosper Temiwa. Yes, I was like, yo, what's up? I mean, I'm kind of feeling stuck right now building this kind of project, and I was wondering if you had any insight into some ways to level up or just try out my hand at some other things. I was like, yeah, I should give open source a look, like just try my best to see if I can find something interesting on there. I already had a GitHub account like way back, but I never really used it. So I mean, following his advice, I just went back to GitHub, followed a couple of people who spoke about it in the what's it called in the community that we're in. Other people were also getting into GitHub at that time. Um, and then there was this. I was on this community called Dev Center Square. I don't know if everyone knows about Dexenta these days.
Yeah, I don't know about
Uh,
this.
yeah, awesome. So Dexenta was like, yo, we should follow each other on GitHub, because it was a growing community there. Let's know what every other person is building. And that was like me just getting into that open source space. So I built this thing called, what was it called again? I think it was the GitHub developer follow kind of thing. So everyone on that community was kind of using that app to follow each other. So just one click, you follow everybody that has been on the app. Everyone follows each other, and we were able to like stay in sync of what everyone was building. So that way, it was just very interesting to get into open source. Seeing, oh, for example, say Prosper, somebody else was building this project, I could go check it out. I could make a pull request. My first pull request was actually to Prosper's project as well, the Laravel hackathon starter, which went like really viral back in those days.
Yeah,
That was my first pull request, just getting into that space, and was really cool. And ever since then, even though I've not been like actively contributing to open source, is just creating a platform or an opportunity to either support others or just engage. Where I work today, my daily work is technically open source. It is actually open source. But
yeah.
it's because it's my 9 to 5. I don't want to like be like, yeah, I'm doing open source work, even though I
Open
am, to
source.
be honest. But I'm not like just contributing to other projects like I used to
Yeah,
when it was not my 9 to 5. So yeah, that was essentially my introduction into that space.
that's very long and in-depth introduction. So, how would
Yeah.
you say has been the experience so far contributing to open source, at least in your early stage?
It was everything I thought it was going to be honest. Because like I said, I wanted to level up, which is one of the reasons why I reached out to Prosper and getting into the open source thing. So instantly it presented me an opportunity to see what other people were building, to
Yeah,
see that the possibilities were endless. Like there were things to build beyond what I was already building. I
yeah,
was able to look into what or other ways that people were writing code. So in those days, if I was implementing something one way, I could maybe search on GitHub for projects that were kind of similar. I could look into how people were building or writing code to do the same feature that I was trying to do, and just reading, learning new things. So right from the very first moment, especially as a beginner developer, I wasn't really beginner then, but probably like getting in a little bit into like the intermediate skill level kind of vibe, because I was building full projects by myself at that time. So it was just eye opening. So from the very first day, there was a lot of value there. Just having access to this large repository of code, larger network of developers gave me instantly, and being able to learn from all of
yeah.
the resources. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beauty of open source, being able to
100.
learn from, in different
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so one question I'd like to ask is, what was the
Mm-hmm.
inspiration behind the Made in Nigeria project? I know it's a collection of projects that are built by Nigerian developers, but what was like the inspiration? At what point did you realize, oh, I needed to do something like this?
Um, I think there was love. Twitter was picking up back then, and starting out, like I mentioned, the developer community at Dev Center Square. There were a lot of developers that were there, and we started following each other on GitHub, so I could see what
Yeah,
people were building.
yeah,
So on Twitter back then, we had people that were very driven to believe that Nigerians were just focused on consuming technology across the world. And for me, we're just like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I can see what some people like Iwe, Adewin Okun, Timmy God back then, Prosper himself, different people were building. So, like, what do you mean? Like, we're just consuming when these people are building this thing. So, it started as a very just small thing, almost like a personal thing for me. Like, okay, let me actually create um, some of these projects that I come across so that I can, I don't know, not necessarily prove to myself, but like show that this thing, I'm not capping, as they say, right? Like there are a lot of
yeah,
projects that are being built. There are a lot of Nigerians that are excelling everywhere. So we started out with just a super with me, and then I shared it on Twitter. People came in, they're like, oh yeah, this is nice. They also need a couple of projects. They sent in their own project, and it just kept scaling. I think we probably have about 100 plus contributors, over 200 projects in the last 7 years or so, and it's amazing. So that was the essential purpose, like just show that I get it that we are developing tech community,
yeah.
but people are already creating stuff beyond just consuming right now.
But,
Yeah. Yes.
okay, so I would like to shift the conversation a bit to how you can use open source to, showcasing your open source skills on probably like your resume or your portfolio.
Yeah.
How do you think, how best do you think people can present their open source contribution on their resume? Because obviously you want your employers to know that, oh, I do contribute to open source. And
Yeah.
Even though you had like link to your GitHub on your resume, sometimes hiring managers don't even just bother. So how do you want
Yeah.
to let them know that yes, so I am an open source warrior, I contribute to open source, but how do you present it on your resume?
Yeah, that is a very good question. The first thing is the one that you have mentioned, like having your GitHub link on your resume itself. I think any manager or hiring manager's case, maybe that is focused on hiring developers that are strong or whatever, would also check out the GitHub link. But in the case of you just making sure that, I mean, you're covering all your bases, then you can, there's usually a section that I recommend. It's like there's a section for activities of volunteer. So you can be like, oh, you can mention that I'm an active open source contributor. And also you can have like a section on your resume that just highlights projects. That's if you either have a project that you're maintaining by yourself or you feel like you've contributed tremendously to a specific project. So in under project section, you could have say maybe Chakra UI, even though you're not the one that created it, but you're an active participant in contributing to that project. You could just have it there like and provide context, right? So sections in resume come in handy in that regard because I don't know if you would directly put it under experience in the sense that it's not a 9 to 5 kind of job at the moment, at least, except if you worked as an open source contributor, anyways. But if you do it on the side, you have PRs that you send to some of these projects. Personally, for me, I have it like on this. I have like some of my open source projects listed as projects, and it's just there with context. On one side, I have. I don't know. I don't. I have an old resume. I could share my screen if that's
No,
also
you can
something that would help.
share your screen.
Let me see if I can show one of my older resumes before. Just give me a second. Um, yeah, 1 second. Let me share my screen.
So,
Right. So just to call my name and my contact details, which is up there. So basically, you have like the experience, and I think it's nice to like have a section that is just activity slash volunteer, and any what's it called? Any hiring manager that's having a look at this kind of gets an insight into what you do, and then at the bottom is like the projects as I mentioned. So two of these are my open source projects, and I'm able to just act there like, hey, I maintain this, and these are projects. I don't even, as you can see, I didn't even necessarily highlight that, oh, these are open source projects, which is probably because I wasn't pushing my resume as, oh, I do every open source contribution, but more
yeah.
like I build stuff, right? But
Mhm.
for the Made in Nigeria dev, it was like, oh, this is an open source platform, which also kind of highlights that. So using something that is very similar to this structure, like just projects under there, or something that is on the side, like, oh, I have activity slash volunteer. I do these contributions as oftentimes as I can, would also help in just highlighting some of the things that you already do. And then hopefully you get the hiring manager to go to your GitHub and you can see the rest of the information. Basically.
That makes sense. I think that makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay, so do you think that maybe hiring managers or maybe employers, do you think they value open source contribution? I know you might say it depends on the role, but in
It does. It
generally,
does depend.
okay, yeah,
First off, it depends on the role. But the thing I think that is key there is that it doesn't hurt you being able to show that you can collaborate, can contribute to valuable projects across the world. So even if these specific managers do not care, let's say your GitHub is empty, it probably will not impact it in any way. But having a GitHub that is not empty, having a GitHub that you've actually shown that you can build stuff, you can contribute to stuff, is not going to be a negative for you. So I think it's always going to be a positive. Like, yes, this is this person putting themselves out there, or this is this person that's they actually build code that all these millions of people are using, or whatever the case is. It's a positive, right? So even if the hiring manager doesn't care, if the role doesn't require it, all of those things, it's not going to hurt you to have something like that. Does that
I
answer your
think
question?
I think that does it. I think that does
Awesome.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say are the benefits of maintaining your own personal open source project or contributing to other people's projects?
Yeah.
Would you say like
Um,
one over the other, or would you say they just carry equal weight?
I was just about to say it depends again. But I think I like to do stuff that is like people focusing more on like value driven activities. So
Yeah.
if you maintain like a couple of, let's say, 10 projects that are not doing so much value, so to say, but you actually contribute to
Yeah.
Chakra UI or Laravel on a steady. Personally,
Yeah.
you're probably more impressed that, oh, you're contributing code that many people are using versus the
Yeah.
fact that, oh, you have a couple of projects. I mean, they probably come in at different weights.
Yeah.
But everything has its own value. If you build a project that is valuable, that shows, or maybe requires high technical know-how, right? And maybe just 20 people that have started. I'm not looking at number of starts to be like, oh, this person actually maintains a project. That is a nice thing, like, oh, this person created a project, they are maintaining it, and this project is of this value. And that's
Yeah.
like, oh, this is really nice. So you can trust this person. So I think it's translating whether it's a created project that you own or it's a project that you're contributing to. Each one translates a different value. But in a case where you successfully created a project, you maintaining it, the project has grown, I would like to also believe that that kind of also highlights a different set of value for you. Either the way you maintain the community, the way you maintain, the code structure with multiple people contributing to the project, and other things that are just like, soft skills here and there. Everything
Yeah.
just kind of communicates their own value. So I don't want to spam it depends the left and right, but it just really depends
Yeah.
on the value and the quality of the work that is being done, either as a contribution. So if I can add to that, I think the way I would like people to think about it, if you're watching this video, is more about it's less about the action, like, oh, I've sent a PR to one project or I've created one project that I'm maintaining, but more about the value. What is this PR I sent? What is the value of it? This project I'm creating to maintain, how valuable is it? Is it like people find use for it? And so if you're thinking in pockets of value that way, the number of projects that you're maintaining, the number of PRs you sent, personally for me would hold less value compared to the actual value that each of those activities give away.
I think I think I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So while still discussing open source projects, do you think, or what would you say are the kind of things that can be open source projects? I know most of the open source projects we see are like either
Yeah.
tools or platforms. But aside those, do you think any other thing can also be like an open source project? Say for instance, I don't know, maybe a blog, maybe I don't know, but I know the usual open source projects we see are tools, usually tools, or this is a platform that you should use. But can any
Yeah.
other thing that comes from those be an open source project?
Yeah, anything can actually be an open source project, all the way from blogs to even enterprise applications. For
Yeah.
example, right now at my company, we are building something called TBDEX, which is supposed to be an underlying infrastructure for to power payments companies, payment gateways, and all of those things. Excuse me.
Sorry.
And that is an open source. Thank you. That is an open source project. But anything that would require, I don't know, what's it called, on code or on project security. Like for example, you don't want to host a bank's I don't know, internals, whatever, as open source, because that
Yeah.
definitely poses a security risk. The
Yeah.
same way you will not commit, API keys or those other things. Those would pose a security risk, and you probably would don't want people to see it. So I think the check to make is this project or this code or whatever the case is. Don't want people to reuse it. Don't want people to be able to like learn from the code. Don't want people to see and help contribute to improving it. Then whatever category it falls in can be open source. So whether it's a payment infrastructure, whether it's a blog, blog page, blog website, whatever the case is, whether it's a company website, whether it's a custom application like say, I think VLC Linux, some of these projects power the world infrastructure, and a lot of them are open source because
Yeah.
literally, yeah, anything, especially if it doesn't pose like that security risk, and if it gets that big and everyone is seeing what's it called, everyone is seeing the PRs, everyone is reviewing, you're not slotting in something malicious in there, it can be open source and stuff like that. So it also depends on like the internal policies of companies who decide if they want to make one particular project open source or not. Um, Not even necessarily the financial aspect. I mean, unless it's a patent or whatever. But there are even situations where companies make money off of the fact that maybe their main project is open source. Then they can build services around it, and they can do other things around it. So any project can be open source. You just need to gauge your policies and your whatever security risks lies in people having access to that code.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think there are other do you think there are like career paths in open source? I don't know in a way to explain this. I've seen people say, "Oh, I'm transitioning to open source full time." So, do you
Yeah.
think what like career paths like open source? I feel like if somebody says, "Oh, I want to work in open source full time," what are the viable career paths that they can explore in open source?
Um, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I know there are people that definitely work in open source full time. There are people that either are part of physical foundations that manage the entire infrastructure. Off the top of my head, I would think of maybe Samson Godi or Ruth Ikega. They have open source organizations that they also run, and it's possible to think of some of these open source institutions as providing value to a community as their full responsibility or their full job. So even maintaining the pillars of open source itself requires people to actively either be on a board or be
Yeah,
on operate things that make things work right. So in that regard, I think you can be active community managers, software engineers, and stuff like that within the open source space, like primarily. But at the same time, you can also choose to work for companies that deal mostly in building open source solutions.
for
For example,
projects.
Laravel itself, yeah, and you're able to say, oh, you're a software engineer that's contributing to an open source project, and you make your daily living off of that, right? On the other aspect of it, that you're not necessarily making a career like within open source, but participating in open source can also help you, put yourself out there, network, and find like maybe your next role, just because of you're engaged in a community and you're interacting with these people.
Yeah,
And it can help you get a job that's, I mean, not necessarily, on open source, but connects you to that space. For example, one of my first jobs outside of like after my hotels and NG internship and after school was I just got an email one day and they're like, "Oh, we saw your GitHub profile. We like what you do. Can you come in for an interview?" So I didn't send my CV. It was just yeah, I was
yeah,
just I had built some things on open source on GitHub rather, and they had seen that, oh, this person can build applications or this person can do something like this.
yeah,
And I got an email like, you can you come for an interview? And that was like my first job at the time. And that simply happened because I had open source contributions and I had projects that were visible for people to see. So I think it goes from just that visibility aspect to actually participating and making open source work as part of the board, the organizations. I think there's something called Google Summer of Code, which is
yeah.
essentially getting people to work within the open source space or some of these open source projects and
Okay.
review and make stuff happen. So yeah.
That makes sense. So now we know next month is October 1st, and that's
Yes.
like whole month long dedicated to us contributing to open source. And I know like
Hmm.
aside from the OGs that already contributed to open source, we have like newbies that also want to contribute to open source because I know people are always telling them now that oh the job market is tough. If you want to gain experience, contribute to open source, look for open source project and contribute to. And most times these people don't how do I say they don't know what kind of contributions they can make. I
You
mean, I
can.
can correct grammar error and say I've made a contribution, but that's not enough. So, how would you, or what would you say to beginners that are looking to contribute to open source during October 1st? Like, how do they find the right projects that would help them build their skill?
That is a very good question. I used to give talks back in the day on how people can find open source projects to contribute to. And one of the key points I used to mention was, first of all, I mean, two rather. There's one. The first one is finding project like within your community or like with someone that you know. So let's say you have a friend that's building something that's open source, or maybe not necessarily a friend. It could be like someone you look up to, but within your space. You could just check out your project. You can feel safer, making a request and see out and having a couple of back and forths, the right way to stuff. And the second one would be like, for example, if you are building in a space like in a Nox space or a Vue space or a React space, tools that you use day to day. For example, if you're installing, say, Vue tooltip or like all these other packages and stuff that you already use in your projects, if you find a way to provide additional value to these projects, there are projects that you can also send a pull request to. Because essentially, all the packages that we use through npm and co is on GitHub. So to say that's how they get on npm, that's how people install it and stuff like that. So I like to recommend for people to start like in their communities and then what's it called? Projects that they already use almost day to day. it will be easier for you to also know that this is the value I want to add, this is the angle I want to go into, and then make this pull request. But outside of that, especially in the spirit of Oktoberfest itself, there are a couple of project organizations that have actually dedicated to themselves to making it easy for either first-time contributors or just people
Mm-hmm.
that want to also get more immersed in the open source
Open
space.
source.
So
Yeah.
this is a lot of organizations like that, including my company. We are also having like TBD is also having like a Oktoberfest happening. So you guys should look out for that.
Okay.
But yeah, so there are ways, especially if you go on GitHub in that period as well. If you search for like first time contributors, people put up labels on their projects like, oh, this is a nice first time issue that you can look into. Sorry, you can fix it. And they all have like the Oktoberfest labels as well. So you can check out for some of these issues, see if it's something that fits your skill set, see if you can dive into it, ask questions. People should try not to be afraid to ask for help. Um,
Yeah.
because regardless of your skill level, it's most likely a new project. You might just need a bit of guidance. You might have some questions that would help you solve it better or stuff like that. So just finding those projects, checking for the labels on GitHub, Oktoberfest or first time contributor issues, stuff like that would also just aid, getting comfortable in that space.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
That does it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you so
sounds
much.
good.
So I would like to also ask, are there like any resources that you can use to learn more about open source? I don't like open
Yeah,
source. I like open source as an entity, but then you don't have like a roadmap, like a roadmap to
yeah,
learning. There's no roadmap to open source. But are there like resources that you can use to?
yeah. There's this particular one I like to recommend actually. I don't know if I can drop the chat. Okay, I can drop it for you. You can put it in the main chat. It's from GitHub themselves. So it's like github.com/open source.
Okay.
And it's like just trying to get people. I don't know if you can highlight that on the screen or
Yeah, I can.
again.
I think it's so I'm going to
Okay.
visit it. Yeah, I've done that.
Okay, exactly. So it's really nice. I feel like it's a resource that covers a lot of things that are, open source related, and just starting off of there, especially if it's your first time getting into open source, which kind of like just provide that boost to have access to the resources, know what technologies you need to learn. If you want to create your own project, if you want to contribute to other people's projects, there's this thing that GitHub does, like Open Source Friday. It's like a vibe. You dedicate like maybe like your Fridays to contribute to open source. And like you
Yeah.
mentioned as well, Oktoberfest is coming up, so there'll be more companies that will also be talking about this, more projects to contribute to and stuff like that. So that is one resource I'll just recommend starting with. In our day and age, most of these open source contributions are built on Git, so it's also essential that you learn the tool itself, know how Git works, how to use it, what it entails, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that does it. So, when contributing to open source, I know several times a lot of professionals have come out to say, oh, it is not just developers that can contribute to open source. But I feel like people are not taking the advice as developers, or we don't have a place in open source. But really, do you think there are places for other people in, like, that are not developers or engineers, say people that are like writers, people that are like programs manager, project managers, community managers, in what way or in their own capacity can they contribute to open source?
Yeah, I would like to think of it like an open source project is still a project. It just happens to be open source. So
Yeah.
the same way that these people would contribute to a project, and I can use Made in Nigeria as an example. So Made in
Yeah.
Nigeria, the dev, we had like this old website where people was very basic, so to say, and wanted to like just improve it. So we can add like storytelling. We can talk a bit more about the creators that are, building open source projects out of Nigeria.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about it, so I made a tweet, and a designer, I mean, a couple of designers actually, but one of them completed the entire thing, did a redesign. In this case, it's an open source project, and this designer is making an open source contribution, even though it
Yeah.
might not, unless they commit, of course, to GitHub, it might not necessarily like increase their square of green or whatever they call it, but they are helping an open source project reach its final form, so to say.
Yeah.
We had people that were like helping manage the project. So like, this is the step we're at. This is the step we need to get to. This is the next level. Those who could easily be fit by a product manager, just helping to control the roadmap of a project. And then we also have writers that were like, I mean, in this case, I was the writer. I was focused on like the copywriting and it is all I want to talk about. And I had someone else entirely that was focused on also getting the stories from these creators, converting into text, post on the blog post, and all of this
Yeah.
is open source work. So I know people like say like, oh, how can I, as a designer, as a writer, how can I do all of these things to contribute to an open source project? But if this is an, I don't know, Eureka moment or whatever the case is, open source projects are also still projects like they would normally operate in the regular world. It's just that in this case, I think they're
Just
hosted on GitHub. You can use the code,
yeah.
and while some of them can be libraries, which is probably like very technical, may not require a lot of designs, blah 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 blah. Blah, not all of them are. So the ones that require design skills, one that require writing, one that you just need to find that project that fits you, just like you find any other project out in the world. And there would be a way for you to provide value to that project with your skills. So I don't think there is one set of technical person that cannot actually help to contribute to open source project. Probably just need to find the right one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense now. So everybody has no reason not to contribute to open source. There's a place for everybody in open
Yeah.
source.
There
You
is a
just
place
look
for
for
everybody.
project that matches their skill sets.
Yeah, right, right. And I mean, like I like to say, starting with tools that you come across in your day to day life gives you like an extra incentive. So maybe as a designer, if you, I'm pulling this out of my, if you find like a project that you probably use for one of your work and you're like, oh, this project is actually open source, or maybe they could have an improvement in this regard with the design, with the
Yeah.
UX, blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah. It's something you can make a contribution to. Like, so it's not necessarily limited to just code. It's not limited to just documentation. It could be literally anything that improves
Okay.
the functionality and experience of that project.
Okay. So this next question,
Yeah.
I don't know. But I know a lot of people have said yes, open source literally helped them in their career. Open source helped them influence their career positively. Would you say open source like had any impact in your career?
Yeah. I mean, 100%.
Okay.
Um, like I described, my very first job out of school was someone sending me like, oh, so a GitHub repository, sorry, a GitHub account. It looks good. Do you want to come for an interview, right? And I think my second job after that was also just based on my activities off of GitHub. I got a recommendation somewhere. I was like, hey, seems like you make a good DevRel person. Can you come and work with us on this? So for me, open source and just being in that space has definitely boosted. Not just, let's forget, like not just my career as like just being able to engage with this kind of tools or
Yeah.
communities as case may be. Um, but also my experience, my knowledge, building some of these things and knowing I have access to this large repository of code has been very
Yeah.
helpful. There are days where I actually sit down. I think there was this tool by SourceGraph that helped back then. But when you just sit down and you search, maybe like I'm trying to use a library that's open source, but the implementation isn't working for me. The issues
Yeah.
are not working. I just search maybe like the method or the function name or something on GitHub, and I see other people implementing it in their own projects, and I can go through it and be like, oh, probably missing a parameter. Like stuff like that happens because I have access to
Yeah.
all of these things, right? So, even today, I still work on open source, thanks to the projects that we work on at my place of work, TBD. So, my career has essentially been built on open source one way or the other. The community it powers, the resources it provides, the libraries, technology, it's been
Yeah.
something that my career has technically been built on around. And yeah, I would, if anyone can, it gets difficult as you go like 9 to 5. If your 9 to 5 is not like focus on open source stuff, it can get difficult. But just being in that space, having access to that tool and that community can be very helpful. So the short answer to your question is yes, it has been
Okay, so
very
for people that also want to work in your path and want open source
yeah.
to influence their career in a positive way, what would you ask them to do? What would you recommend? Like if they were to ask you for advice on how to go about it.
Yeah, it's just like the same question I asked Prosper back in those days, which is like, oh, I feel like I'm stuck in the same space. I want to level up, and he said, go and have a look at open source. So I think the same thing I would be like, if you want to start looking into open source, it's just about finding out like new projects or seeing how people build stuff that you might be interested in being able to build. It's a resource that would help you level up at different levels because even beginner developers have their own projects that could be bad code, so to say, on GitHub. So it gives you insight into so many things. A lot of the AI tools these days are also powered on open source,
Open
existing
source,
open
yeah.
source code. So excuse me, if you're asking ChatGPT a question, there's a high chance that the response is giving is from an open source project
Source
and
project.
stuff like that. Yeah. So, but I think the key thing or the key allies there will be like just being able to provide value at the global scale. If you have a skill that you feel like is very valuable today, and you find a project, an open source project that you could contribute to, in that exact moment, you have broken the barrier of location with your skill set. So it's not like you have to wait for someone that would hire you in the same state you live in or something like that. But you're able
Yeah.
to contribute your skill set, your code, your stuff like that to a project that is used from wherever it is in the world. And that is value on a global scale. So having that access, the question is not like, oh, I have this access, what can I do with it? It's literally
Mm-hmm.
anything. It's just about taking it step by step, identifying what ideal value would you want to get out of this for your career. Do you want to go into developer advocacy? Do you want to level up as a software engineer? Do you want to be able to build this kind of project or this kind of project? You're able to find those kind of projects that you want to be able to build on GitHub. You could see like, oh shit, this is part of my French. This is what this looks like if it's built out this scale. You can get involved in the community. For me, it's just about trying to picture where you want to be, or what kind of things you want to be able to do. And if you have the
Yeah.
time, of course, being able to look for those things and putting yourself in that space. It's not you would level up quick scheme like automatically it works for you.
You got the
But
flow.
it's yeah, but it's very value driven, especially if you do it intentionally. Um, if you spend 1 week, going through one particular code that you're actually learning from, you're not going to be the same person you were 1 week ago because you would have learned new stuff. You would have leveled up your skill set. You're able to build something new or stuff like that. So that is what I would recommend because I think the first time I probably learned in open source was maybe 2014, and that's like 10 years ago. So it's not like it's still
That's
a
a long,
journey.
it's a long
Yeah,
period.
yeah. I think it's 2016-ish. I think yeah, probably 2016. That's 8 years ago. Probably
Yeah, that's
2016 more
still
likely.
very long. Some people are just hearing about open source for the first time this year.
Exactly. Exactly. So my point is like it's still a journey. It's not like you get into open
Yeah.
source and then boom, you're working at wherever it is that you want to work. It's just an opportunity for you to acquire and provide value at a global scale.
Okay. Thank you very
Yeah,
much. So I have like
100%.
two more questions to go.
Okay, sure.
Uh, this one is, what's the intersection like? Is there any intersection between DevRel and open source, or would you say there's a place for DevRel in open source, or there's a place for open source in DevRel? I don't know if you.
That's quite a question. So directly, there's not necessarily an intersection simply because you can be a developer advocate for a non-open source project. That has nothing to do with open source. It could just be something else entirely, and there's no connection. The developer advocacy itself is connected to developers, and not every developer is doing open source stuff. So if you're working in DevRel at a company that has no interest or no involvement in open source stuff, then it might be totally out of your area of expertise, right? But with open source, especially with the fact that almost all open source projects, especially if it's technical, would have some sort of level of developer activity going on it.
Yeah.
So you can assume that yes, there will be some level of developer advocacy or relations going on with some of these projects. So why it's not like automatically the other way around, in most cases, people that work in open source stuff, most of them will not call you a developer, they're not call themselves a developer advocate. They could just be an engineer that loves to build solutions and people use it, and that's just what it is, right? Like it stops there. But as a developer advocate, you can work in the space because you're talking about libraries that provide value to people. You can help to shape the developer experience of people that will come to use these open source projects. Because, for
Yeah.
example, for a large period of time, maybe even till date, a lot of people feel like open source project does not have to look good, does not have to you know have a good experience. It just has to work, and then you go through whatever you have to do to it. But today we have like improved tools to do documentation. We have improved
Yeah.
tools to people go give talks about some of these open source projects. They give
Mm-hmm.
talks about the libraries, the tools. People give like live stream like this about some of these technologies, right? And everything now can start falling into developer advocacy because now you're shaping the experience and the relationship from the general developers that could use this particular project or tool with the actual technical repository for it. So um, there is some form of like connection. You can be a developer advocate in this space, but it's not
Yeah.
necessarily a requirement, or it's not like an equal one-to-one relationship, so to say.
Okay. Okay. That
Yeah.
makes sense. So now the final question. I feel like this is the question that I got most. Everybody wanted to know.
All
Apparently,
right.
everybody wants to become a GitHub star, which is nice.
Yeah.
and and I think there's like this. There's I don't know how to put it, but there's a thing like when you contribute to open source projects. Oh, GitHub star is somewhere around the corner. So
Right.
I want
I
to know how they
mean,
can
this
be
is
GitHub star.
probably a reality check because I am not a GitHub star. I've been contributing to GitHub for what, 8, 9, whatever years.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm not a GitHub star, so I don't think it's an automatic for anyone that is expecting that. I mean, that probably answers that part of the question. But I do know a lot of people. I have a lot of friends that are GitHub stars, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all centered around providing value to your community in a way that, of course, the people that are in charge of it recognize this activity, this effort. So it's a I think, set of requirements, so to say. Um, the website is stars.github.com, if I remember correctly, and they did list some of these requirements. So if you want to be a GitHub star, if it's like a goal for you, it's definitely something to check out. But everything is still built about engaging in this open source communities, providing value to your own immediate community, and just being a figure of I don't know if it requires to be a figure of authority, but at least sharing knowledge and impacting the people that. I'm not sure if it requires GitHub technologies as well, but just being in that open source space and being someone that's providing value to your immediate community is probably a good start.
Yeah.
All the best
So
to whoever wants to be.
so contributing to open source does not automatically guarantee you a straight path.
No, I mean, I wonder if there's anything that is guaranteed a straight path in this world anymore. We are way too many people, first of all,
Yeah.
globally. So it's more about standing out, being a star, like literally. So being a GitHub star, being a star on GitHub, and just being able to align yourself with also the values that GitHub represents, contributing to the open source space, the community yourself, and all those other things. But it's just one of those things. But there are requirements for it that you can also try to meet if it's something that is your goal.
Yeah. I shared the link to the website. So for anybody
Yeah.
that wants to be a GitHub star, you can
I
check
think if
out
you if you click on it from your end, it should be able to show up on the screen.
okay.
There should be a plus that comes up, and then yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah, nice.
so if you want to be a GitHub star, all the best. I wish you all
All
the
the
best.
best. Yes.
So yeah, I
I'm
think
sorry
that
I can't help too much there because, like I said, I'm not a GitHub star.
yeah. So I think that's like the last of my questions. I've like completely exhausted all my questions. And
Yeah, no
today
worries.
has been very, very insightful. And I hope that for anyone that's watching, like you've learned a thing or two about open source and how to make meaningful contributions. And then maybe all these things you've learned here by next month during October 1st, you can,
Yeah.
bring them. And I also want to ask, do you have like maybe a couple of open source projects that I feel like people should be able to contribute to so I can maybe as well share for people that do
Yeah.
not want, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure
You
if you
can
have the
share that
right
with me
link
later.
yet.
Then
Oh,
I would,
okay.
you can
Yeah,
share
like
that
I
with me.
mentioned, I work at TBD. We're currently also doing. We're going to participate in Oktoberfest, so we have like a couple of projects that people can look into to contribute to. And if you also go to madenigeria.dev, there are like a ton of open source projects there. You can go through whichever one aligns to like technology you use or stuff like that, and pick up one or two projects as well.
Yeah, that was. So do you have like any parting words for us? Anything basically? Anything.
I mean, I guess it's just there are two major things that drive a lot of things, which is also being very value driven and also the concept of compounding. So, like we mentioned, my first open source project contribution was like 8 years ago ish, but
Yeah.
everything since then and every contribution, every activity has essentially compounded to today. So I would like to implore people to focus more on like the value they are providing versus vanity numbers, so to say, like managing this amount of contributions or projects, stuff like that,
Yeah.
but focusing more on the value and just realize that I mean it takes time, it compounds, and just keep doing what you consider valuable and helpful to you.
And I also like to add, I know many people do not like to say this, but open source is free work. You don't get paid for open source, so you don't
I mean, you
contribute.
can't. You can't get paid, but by default, you do not
Get
get paid.
paid,
Yes.
but looking at things, there are not so many projects that would pay you at the beginning. I mean, you may be so lucky to get, but
Yeah.
speaking in the real sense of things, there are like very few projects that will be willing to pay you. So do not have the notion that, oh, when I contribute to open source project, I'm going to get money. Just
Right.
keep
Right.
it and focus on
Right.
providing value. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
value-driven development.
yeah, I think that's the end of my question, and we've come to the end of today's webinar. And I hope
Thank
everyone has
you.
learned so because I've really learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to next month that I can make meaningful contribution. Hopefully, I can also become a gift star like the way other people want to become a gift star.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
thank you so
All
much for
right.
joining us, kid.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
So,
Take care, everyone.
yeah, bye.
Bye.